Hello, welcome to part 2 of what's robbing the tone and what to do about it. So in the first video I talked about there being 5, what I think of as 5 areas of problem which might be preventing your guitar from having the best tone that guitar can have. And the first one of those was mechanical. The others were electrical, magnetic, amplifier issues and psychological issues. Mechanical is the thing of real interest because those are the things that we can fix. So I have here a Parker Hornet PM20. It's built somewhere in the Far East, just to illustrate what I'm talking about. Put aside the magnetic and electrical issues for now, which is all about the pickups and their interaction with the strings, and we'll look at the mechanical issues. So the overall picture of all the mechanical issues is the notes produced on a guitar are produced by plucking the metal string, and what affects the quality of the vibration which the electrical pickups can then feel and send out as a sound signal is the way in which the string, each string, all strings are supported by the whole structure of the guitar. So if everything was loose between the point of takeoff from the bridge and the point of takeoff from the nut, if everything was loose or soft or floppy, then the guitar would be almost silent. So it has to be rigid. So the pathway between these 2 points of string takeoff, when the strings are open, that is not fretted. What lies between those two is a pathway of transmission of energy or transmission of vibration. And let's just go through what that is. So starting at this end of the bridge, you have the string. The string sits on a string saddle. That saddle is mounted in the bridge itself, and that may be not a perfect tight connection. Then the bridge itself is mounted on knurled screws which go up and down a threaded rod. Again, possibility of loss of energy there if something's wrong. The threaded rod threads into a fixture which is pressed into the wood of the guitar and has a female thread in it. That may not be securely seated in the wood of the guitar. Then you have the body of the guitar itself is the transmission pathway all the way through the neck, and let's not forget there's often a neck to body joint which itself might be the cause of loss, all the way through the neck up to the nut, the joint between the nut and the wood at this end, and then the string sits in a particular kind of slot in the nut which has to be the right size, the right shape and in the right direction. So there's a lot of things in that energy pathway which, if there's something wrong, will affect the way the string rings out and might detract from its natural resonance. Now that's when the strings are open. When the strings are being fretted, it changes. The point of takeoff of the string is no longer the nut. It's where your finger presses the string to the fret. So this time the pathway ends up going from string to bridge saddle to bridge mounting posts to the body of the guitar, the joint to the neck, up through the neck, the joint of the fingerboard to the neck, the joint of the fret to the fingerboard, and your finger is providing the pressure to make that rigid connection. So That's an overall look. And I want to take just one part of that first, and that is the bridge. So I'm going to talk about bridge issues for the rest of this video. So continuing with this guitar, let's take a look at the bridge. Let's get the autofocus doing its job. So you can see that the strings here pass over wedge-shaped metal pieces called the saddles, and those can be cranked forwards and backwards for intonation using grub screws. The bridge is a cast piece of brass plated in chrome, and that's mounted on these posts which thread into inserts which are pressed into the body. That's one type of bridge, very common type of bridge. Then we have the Fender Stratocaster tremolo bridge. Same sort of thing, but this time the bridge is not mounted on posts which thread into inserts which are pressed into the wood. This time the saddles ride on the top of a cast tremolo block which goes into the guitar body, and the strings are threaded into that block, so there are 6 holes. Quite different, but lots of components which could be loose or faulty or badly manufactured in this type as well. Another kind of bridge is what I have here on this old Hofner. You see them on quite a few different kinds of guitars. It's a solid bridge. The whole thing is solid. There's no saddles to move, no grub screws, no threaded rings. But again, this sits on posts which have knurled screws underneath to adjust the height at bass end and treble end, but this time, instead of those posts threading into inserts pressed into the body, this whole thing sits on top of the body. You could call it a floating bridge. So it just sits on the surface and is held down by the pressure of the strings. So there are no components to be loose. But on the other hand, there's no way of finely adjusting the intonation and individual string height either. So the thing is cast in a curve to mimic the curve of the fretboard. And then we have something called break angle. So on this guitar you can see that the angle behind the bridge, to the point where the strings are anchored, is quite acute. If it was too shallow, then there wouldn't be enough pressure to make a really good rigid contact with the bridge saddle. So it's not a problem on this one. There are other guitars where after the bridge there's another metal bar and the strings emerge from that metal bar, and the two things are adjustable with respect to each other. So sometimes if there's not enough break angle, it's fairly easy just to lower the stop bar. Less easy is when there is a trapeze type arrangement. So a semi-acoustic guitar may have a trapeze. Hang on a second and I'll show. So this is a jazz guitar and it has a trapeze. That means because the top of the guitar is thin, it's a hollow guitar, then you can't start boring holes into it for the anchor point of the strings. So a trapeze is attached, which runs all the way to the bottom of the guitar, so the strain is taken in a different way. And as you can see, this one has a much shallower, can you see? Has a much shallower break angle than the Parker I just showed you. That's not so easy to alter on this kind of guitar, but I'm showing it you for completeness. 3 more types of bridge. Here we have a wooden bridge for an arch top for a jazz guitar. Are we in focus? So it's made of ebony. It's height adjustable, again at the bass end and the treble end, with these knurled screws, and it has a crude kind of intonation in there, in the top slopes. So it's shorter at the treble end, longer at the bass string end. And then here's something almost identical, but this time it has more sophisticated provision for intonation. So it's been shaped into the typical configuration required by electric guitar strings. And finally, for completion, this is an acoustic guitar bridge off something like a Gibson or a Martin. It's rosewood, it's glued on the top of the guitar, and has a saddle which is inserted in a slot, ideally bone. So if that's too sloppy, or is too high and starts to lean, there are all kinds of problems with acoustic guitar bridges. But this series of videos is really aimed at electric guitars, so that's enough of that. So how are we going to know if there are problems? If the bridge contains the wrong kind of materials, so let's say for instance instead of metal saddles on an adjustable bridge, they're plastic, throw them away, get some metal ones. The plastic will absorb energy. But the main thing to spot is if there are things loose and rattling which will rob vibration from the string. And the way to find that out is to unplug the guitar and play it and listen carefully and touch as many parts as you can. With the strings on, that is. With the strings off, lots of things will be loose anyway. But if anything's rattling with the strings on, then there's a problem. And some action will have to be taken to eliminate that rattle, because that rattle is robbing the tone. So that gives you some ideas of the issues around bridges. Obviously can't go on and on into greater and greater detail. In the next video I'll look at the rest of the transmission pathway. So from the bridge down through the body, through the neck to body joint, the materials, to the nut to neck joint, and the nature of the nut. And that'll probably be enough for another video. I've actually prepared a sort of PowerPoint presentation, list of bullet points, yeah, of all the issues that I think there can be that rob the tone. And I will include that at some point as part of the introduction to one of these videos, so that it can be used as a reference list, a sort of checklist of all the things to look at if you're fairly certain that something's wrong with your tone. And not just mechanical, that's also going to be electrical, magnetic, etc. Okay, so that's the end of part 2. Stand by for part 3 of what's robbing the tone. Thanks for watching.